The moment I saw the violation notice duct taped to my front door right over my American flag, I knew Karen from the HOA had finally lost it. It wasn't even subtle. Red ink, bold letters, and some official-sounding nonsense about my unauthorized display of political symbolism. Political. It was an American flag, on my front porch, on the 4th of July. My name's Barrett Zeller. I'm a retired firefighter, husband and father of one teenage boy. I've lived in the Rosewood Pines community for 8 years, and I've flown the same flag every Independence Day since we moved in. Never once had an issue until Karen Monrovia got elected president of the HOA. Karen was the kind of woman who wore sunglasses inside and carried around a clipboard like it was a badge. She was always lurking, always watching, and always finding some reason to fine people. Too many weeds. Fence too high. Garage door open too long. She ran the HOA like her personal kingdom. I stood on my porch, staring at that ticket like it had personally insulted me. My flag was still fluttering in the morning breeze, bright and crisp. I just replaced it a month ago. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. "Dad," my son Wyatt called from inside. "What's going on?" "Karen's at it again," I said, yanking the notice off the door and crumpling it. "She thinks the flag is political." Wyatt stepped out onto the porch beside me. "That can't be legal." "It's not," I said, "and she just picked the wrong battle." I wasn't the kind of guy to let things slide. Years of firehouse politics and city codes had taught me how to read between the lines and how to stand up when it counted. I went back inside, pulled out the dusty HOA bylaws from the filing cabinet, and flipped through them. Nothing. Not a single line banned flags unless they were offensive or obstructing public view. Mine was on a pole mounted properly next to the porch light. It wasn't even touching the siding. The next morning, I saw Karen standing at the edge of my lawn, arms crossed, clipboard in hand, talking to her lackey, June, another middle-aged gossip who loved rules more than she loved her own grandkids. "I told him it's a violation," Karen said loudly, clearly wanting me to hear. "We can fine him for every day it stays up." I walked out, coffee in hand. "Morning, ladies," Karen's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Zeller, you received the notice." "I did, and I'll be ignoring it." "That would be a mistake," she said, tapping her clipboard. Section 3.5 clearly outlines the HOA's authority to regulate the exterior appearance of properties. Not when it overrides federal law. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 says you can't stop homeowners from flying the flag. Karen's lips tightened. "That only applies to government interference." "No," I said, stepping closer. "It applies to any entity, including HOAs. You can limit how it's displayed for safety, but you can't ban it, and since it's not illegal, you're overstepping." June looked nervous. Karen didn't. "You can take it down voluntarily," she said, "or the board will begin daily fines." I finished my coffee and set the mug on the railing. "Fine me, but remember you started this." I left the flag up. The fines started 2 days later, $50 per day. They even mailed me a formal letter with the HOA's embossed seal, acting like they were some kind of court. Instead of getting mad, I got strategic. I filed a request to attend the next HOA board meeting, and then I got to work. I printed out the federal flag law, highlighted the relevant sections, and compiled photos of every other house in the neighborhood displaying flags, state flags, sports flags, even one guy with a giant pirate flag on his garage. None of them had been cited. But that's the thing about Karen, she didn't like being challenged, especially not in public. The night of the meeting, I showed up early and sat front and center. Karen was already seated at the head of the table, clipboard in hand, acting like she was presiding over a Supreme Court hearing. The other board members, mostly retirees who nodded at everything she said, sat beside her. "Mr. Zeller," she said without looking at me, "you may speak." I stood up, unfolded my documents, and handed copies to each board member. "I'm here to dispute the fines issued against me for flying an American flag on my home." According to federal law, Karen interrupted. "We are not here to debate federal law, Mr. Zeller. We are governed by our community's covenants, and your covenants cannot override federal law." I pointed to the highlighted section. "The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. "You should read it, Karen." One of the board members, a quiet guy named Frank, actually leaned in and started reading. Karen looked annoyed. "We're also a private association," Karen said. "We have the right to enforce appearance standards." "Not selectively," I said. "Because I've taken photos of over 20 homes in this neighborhood flying flags. None of them got fined, just me." There were murmurs in the room. A few neighbors had come to watch, and now they were whispering to each other. "That's not," Karen began, but I cut her off. "I'm requesting a full review of the fines. If they're not revoked, I'll be filing a complaint in small claims court, and I'll be adding damages for harassment and unlawful enforcement." Karen's face flushed. "You're threatening legal action over a flag." "No," I said. "I'm protecting my rights. And if I'm going to court, I'll also be asking the judge to review your financial practices. I've got questions about how those community fees are being used." That got everyone's attention. I'd been digging through the public financial records for the HOA. Karen had been authorizing landscaping contracts to a company run by her cousin, overpriced ones. I had the receipts. Karen's face went pale. "You're bluffing," she said. "Try me." The meeting spiraled into chaos after that. Neighbors started asking questions. Frank wanted to see the financial reports. Karen tried to adjourn the meeting, but it was too late. The board voted to put an emergency audit on the agenda for the next session. The fines against me were temporarily suspended, pending review. But I wasn't backing down. I filed the paperwork for small claims court the next morning, and I added a request for full disclosure of HOA expenditures under our state's transparency laws. Karen had poked the wrong bear, and I was just getting started. I didn't sleep much the night after the HOA meeting. Not from stress adrenaline. I'd hit a nerve and I knew it. I just didn't know how deep it went yet. By morning, I had a plan. I wasn't going to wait for the next board meeting to play out. I was going to pull the thread until the whole thing unraveled. First thing, I stopped by the county recorder's office and filed a public records request. I asked for every HOA expenditure and contract approval for the past 5 years. The clerk raised her eyebrows when she saw the size of the request. "You expecting something juicy?" she asked. "Let's just say I have suspicions," I replied. Next, I called a friend of mine, Ralph Dugan. Ralph and I served on the same engine company back in the day, but after he retired, he went into private investigations. He wasn't cheap, but he owed me a favor. I asked him to look into the landscaping company the HOA had been using for the past 2 years. The name was generic Greenline Groundskeeping, but I'd already seen enough to know it was more than overpriced lawn mowing. "Give me 2 days," Ralph said. "If there's something dirty, I'll find it." Back home, I kept my head down. I didn't take down the flag, and I didn't respond to the 2 more notices that showed up in my mailbox. I wasn't going to waste time arguing with paper. I was building a case. On the 3rd day, Ralph called. "You're going to want to sit down," he said. "Lay it on me. Greenline Groundskeeping is registered under a Shell LLC set up 2 years ago. The registered agent is a guy named Roland Monrovia. That name ring a bell?" "Karen's son," I said, my jaw tightening. "Bingo." "The address listed on the LLC paperwork is a residential house over in Oakview. Guess who owns it?" "Let me guess, Karen." "Yep, bought under her maiden name 3 years ago. They've been funneling money to a family-run company that doesn't even own commercial equipment." I pulled drone footage. The same rusty pickup shows up to every job site. No crew, just one guy with a weed whacker. I let out a long breath. That wasn't just unethical. That was embezzlement. "Think it's enough for the DA?" I asked. "If you package it right and show intent, absolutely. Especially if you can find out who approved the contracts." I hung up and got to work. I wasn't tech-savvy, but Wyatt was. He helped me build a timeline and organize the invoices, emails, and public documents into a neat digital folder. We printed hard copies, two full binders, one for the court, one for the district attorney's office. The next day, I filed my small claims case formally, but I also drove straight down to the county prosecutor's office and requested an appointment. I brought both binders and walked them in myself. The assistant DA, a woman named Marissa Kepler, took the meeting. She flipped through the binder slowly, her expression unreadable. "You compiled all this yourself?" she asked. Public records, invoices, and a little help from a licensed PI, I said. She tapped one of the contract pages. This is signed by the HOA treasurer. Is that the same Frank who was at the meeting? No, that's Lester Vaughn, older guy, never says much. She nodded. We'll open a preliminary investigation. If this checks out, it could trigger a full audit. That was all I needed to hear. Back in Rosewood Pines, things were tense. Word had gotten out about the court case. Karen was trying to downplay it, calling it a neighborly misunderstanding. But people started asking harder questions. Mailboxes were buzzing. Conversations got quiet whenever she walked by. One afternoon, I was out hosing down the driveway when Lester Vaughn pulled up in his golf cart. He sat there a moment, hands on the wheel, then stepped out and walked over. You really filed that lawsuit? He asked, voice low. I did. He looked around. You know, she told us the board voted on those contracts. We never did. You willing to say that under oath? He hesitated. If it goes legal, I'm not taking the fall for her. That was enough for me. I added his statement to the folder. The court date came faster than I expected. Small claims court isn't glamorous, no juries, no fancy arguments. Just a judge, a docket, and whoever shows up. But I was ready. Karen arrived with 2 folders and a tight-lipped attorney who looked like he charged by the hour. I didn't bring a lawyer. I didn't need one. I brought facts. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Harrow, called the case and motioned for us to begin. Karen's attorney stood up first and launched into a dry explanation about HOA authority, community standards, and the importance of uniformity. Judge Harrow interrupted. Mr. Zeller, your response. I stood and handed her my binder. For the record, I'm not just disputing the fines. I'm presenting evidence of financial misconduct by the HOA leadership, which I believe influenced the enforcement of these fines in the first place. She raised an eyebrow. Financial misconduct. Yes, Your Honor. I've included documentation showing that the HOA has been awarding contracts to a company secretly owned by President Karen Monrovia's immediate family. These contracts were not reviewed or approved by the full board. They are significantly overpriced and the services rendered are minimal. Karen shifted in her seat. Judge Harrow flipped through the binder. And what does this have to do with the flag citation? Everything. I believe the citation was punitive retaliation for questioning how the HOA was operating. I've also included photographs of over 24 homes in the same neighborhood flying various flags. None of them received violations, only mine. The judge turned to Karen's attorney. Is there a legitimate reason Mr. Zeller's flag was singled out? The attorney started to speak, but Karen cut in. It was political, she said. We're trying to keep the neighborhood neutral. Judge Harrow looked back at me. Is the flag in question a United States flag? Yes. She turned back to Karen. Do you realize the federal protections for that flag supersede any HOA restrictions unless there's a safety issue? I was just trying to maintain standards, Karen muttered. Standards don't override federal law, Judge Harrow said sharply, and selective enforcement, if proven, constitutes harassment. The ruling came 10 minutes later. The fines were not only voided, they were declared unlawful. The HOA was ordered to reimburse me in full, and Judge Harrow referred the matter of the financial irregularities to the county prosecutor's office for further review. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I'd felt in months, but things didn't end there. That same evening, county investigators showed up at the HOA office, not quietly either. 2 unmarked cars and 3 plainclothes auditors. They carried boxes and left with more. Karen wasn't seen for the rest of the week. The next board meeting was packed, standing room only. Frank opened the meeting with a tremble in his voice, announcing that Karen had voluntarily resigned pending the investigation. Lester followed that up by admitting he'd been signing contracts without full board votes. Then came the real bombshell. An interim treasurer had found over $25,000 in maintenance expenses that had never been accounted for. Vague line items, no receipts, and all linked back to Green Line groundskeeping. Neighbors weren't just angry, they were furious. A petition passed around to initiate a recall election for the remaining board members who'd sat silently. It only took 2 days to get the signatures. I didn't run for the board. That wasn't why I did it. I just wanted my flag, my porch, and my peace of mind. But when a few of the neighbors asked if I'd be willing to serve on the Financial Oversight Committee, I said yes. Not because I wanted power, because I'd seen what happened when nobody asked questions. And Karen, well, last I heard, she'd hired a criminal defense attorney. Turns out, when you treat your neighborhood like a kingdom, eventually the people rise up. And they bring receipts. 3 weeks after the courtroom ruling, Rosewood Pines looked different, and not just because flags had sprouted on porches like spring flowers after a storm. People were talking again. Neighbors who used to wave and walk on were now stopping for full conversations. Something had shifted. The silence that had hung over the neighborhood like fog had finally lifted, but just because Karen had resigned didn't mean the story was over. The Financial Oversight Committee made up of me, a former accountant named Sheila Pirano, and a no-nonsense widower named Ron Patel had started digging through the records the county left behind after their sweep. What we found made my stomach twist tighter with each page. There were inconsistencies going back at least 3 years. Vague reimbursements, missing receipts, check images with only Karen's signature, and what appeared to be duplicated payments for the same contract, sometimes only weeks apart. Even worse, community events that never happened were marked as fully funded line items. One alleged summer barbecue had a food and beverage charge of nearly $6,000, but no one remembered attending it because it never existed. We spent a week cataloging everything. Sheila even brought in a portable scanner and cross-referenced old bank statements against vendor invoices. The deeper we went, the more it felt like the HOA account had been used like a private checking account. There were purchases from high-end furniture stores, a boutique spa, and oddly, a payment labeled legal retainer that predated my lawsuit by 6 months. Ron leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and let out a long, quiet breath. This wasn't just mismanagement, he said. This was planned. She never expected anyone to question it. I nodded, flipping to a section Sheila had just flagged. There's a withdrawal here for $12,000 labeled exterior restoration project pool house, but the pool house hasn't been touched since it was built. Exactly, Sheila said. And look at the signatory. That's not even the treasurer's name. That's Lester's last name, but the signature doesn't match any of the others. We knew what we had to do. I called Marissa Kepler at the county prosecutor's office again and told her we'd uncovered more. Bring it in, she said. And this time, don't make copies. We'll take custody of the originals for chain of evidence. The following Monday morning, I walked into the county building with a sealed banker's box and a thumb drive. Marissa met me in the lobby and escorted me back to a conference room where 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit were already waiting. One of them, a bald man named Agent Lewis, had a face like he'd spent 20 years catching people who thought they were too clever to get caught. He flipped through the documents quickly, stopping now and then to circle something with a red pen. Do you know if anyone else on the board was aware of this? He asked without looking up. Based on what the current members have said, no. Most of them weren't even present for the votes she claimed happened. We've got meeting minutes that were clearly fabricated. One of the so-called votes has names of board members who'd already moved out of the neighborhood by that date. Agent Lewis looked up at that. Names of people who no longer lived there, 2 of them. One moved out last year, the other passed away in March, still listed as present and voting. He looked at Marissa. That's forgery and fraud. We'll need to subpoena the HOA's banking institution and the property management company they used. If this was a coordinated effort, there may be more we haven't seen. Marissa turned to me. Thank you for bringing this. You've done more than most people would. I left the building feeling like I was walking out of a fire zone, soot-covered but alive. That evening, I called a community meeting in the Rosewood Pines clubhouse. We'd never had an open forum before, but dozens of neighbors showed up, curious and cautious. Ron opened the meeting by explaining what the Oversight Committee had found. Sheila followed up with a brief outline of the financial discrepancies. When it was my turn, I kept it short. This wasn't just a misuse of funds, it was theft. Our money, your money, was being siphoned away under the guise of community improvements that never happened. The authorities are involved now, and we're not letting this slide under the rug. An older resident, Mrs. Callahan, raised her hand. What happens now? We paid all those fees. Are we going to get them back? I don't know yet, I said. That'll depend on what the county finds, but if criminal charges are filed, restitution will be part of it. What we can do right now is make sure this never happens again. A younger couple near the back, new homeowners, asked if the HOA was still functional. It is, Sheila replied, but under interim oversight. We'll be holding a special election next month to replace the open seats. Until then, no new fees, no new contracts, and every expenditure will be posted publicly. That got a round of applause. The next day, 2 detectives from the county showed up at Karen's house with a warrant. She wasn't home, but they left with boxes. Word spread fast the HOA president's home being searched was the kind of thing that didn't happen in quiet suburbs. But it didn't end there. Later that week, Lester Vaughn was taken in for questioning. Most of the board had assumed he was clueless, but the investigators found something different. Turns out, Lester had been signing blank checks and handing them to Karen, claiming it was to save time. Whether he was complicit or just plain negligent was still being sorted out, but the damage was done. That Friday, my phone rang again. It was Marissa. We filed preliminary charges against Karen Monroe via fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and obstruction. The judge approved a motion to freeze her personal accounts. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stood there in my garage, staring at the wall, letting the weight of it settle. Not satisfaction, not even relief, just finality. Thank you, I said finally. She's going to fight it, Marissa continued. She's hired a defense attorney who's already trying to claim it was all a misunderstanding, but the evidence is strong. That weekend, I took Wyatt fishing. We didn't talk about the HOA or the investigation or anything to do with the neighborhood. Just bait, water, and silence. It felt good. When we got back, the mailbox had a letter from the state's Community Housing Commission, an official notice that Rosewood Pines HOA was being placed under temporary state supervision pending the outcome of the investigation. That was something I never knew could happen. Apparently, if a homeowners association is found to be operating unlawfully or posing a risk to residents, the state can appoint a temporary trustee to oversee operations until a new governing board is elected. It was rare, but not unheard of. For the first time, accountability was coming from more than just within. In the months that followed, new elections were held. Sheila was voted president, Ron handled treasury, and I stayed on the oversight committee. We implemented mandatory transparency measures. All meetings recorded, all budgets public, and no contracts awarded without at least 3 competitive bids and a full board vote. The pool house finally got the maintenance it had supposedly received years ago. The clubhouse got new paint. And the community newsletter, once a stale list of vague updates, now featured real information, budget breakdowns, project timelines, and open invitations for residents to attend every meeting. As for Karen, her trial date was set for the fall. Last I heard, she was trying to cut a plea deal. But that wasn't my concern anymore. The neighborhood had moved on, and not just past her, but past the culture of fear and silence she'd built. Every single porch in Rosewood Pines now had a flag. Some American, some state, some even commemorating military service or heritage, but all legal. All proud, and none of them fined. Justice didn't come with fireworks. It came with slow, steady pressure, with paperwork, persistence, and people who refused to look the other way. And in the end, it wasn't just about the flag. It never was. It was about who had the right to decide what a neighborhood stood for, and who didn't get to take that away. The morning after the state appointed a trustee to oversee Rosewood Pines, a quiet calm settled over the neighborhood. Not the eerie, watch-your-back kind that had hung around during Karen's reign, but something more like collective exhalation. For the first time in years, there was no one lurking around with a clipboard, and no cryptically worded notices stuffed under door mats. But despite the new sense of order, something still didn't sit right with me. The financial audit had exposed misappropriated funds, fake board meetings, and forged votes, but there was one detail buried in the records that hadn't been addressed yet. A payment labeled security system installation for nearly $28,000, marked as completed 2 years ago, but with no sign of any work ever being done. I hadn't thought much of it at first. Maybe it was just another fake project. But then I remembered something odd. 2 years ago, Karen had started warning people about unruly behavior near the clubhouse. She'd sent an email, her usual dictatorial tone, claiming the board had installed measures to ensure neighborhood safety. Back then, no one questioned it. But now I had to wonder. I brought it up during the next oversight committee meeting. "Sheila, do you remember that security system Karen claimed was installed at the clubhouse?" I asked. She adjusted her glasses and flipped through one of the audit binders. "You mean the line item for $27,864. That's the one. Have you ever seen a single security camera over there?" Ron leaned forward. "Not once, and I've walked around that clubhouse more times than I can count. There's nothing mounted anywhere." "No signs, no wiring, no boxes," I nodded. "Then where did that money go?" Sheila pulled out a copy of the invoice. "The vendor listed is a company called Horizon Access Solutions. It's registered in state, but there's no website, no physical address, just a P.O. box." My gut was already clenching. "Okay, we need to find out who owns that company." Ron took the invoice and stood up. "I'll check with the Secretary of State's business registry." 2 days later, he called. "Barrett, you're going to want to see this." We met at his house, and he handed me a printed sheet from the state database. Horizon Access Solutions was registered under a name neither of us expected: Lana Pierce. Karen's longtime friend and former HOA secretary, who had moved to Arizona 8 months earlier, right after Karen's fake barbecue entry hit the books. I stared at the document. "You think she was in on it?" Ron nodded. "Looks like Horizon was set up right around the time that security system was supposedly installed. It's a shell, just like Green Line groundskeeping. But here's the kicker: there's a second company listed under the same P.O. box. One that handled community consulting for multiple HOAs in the area." "Are you saying this wasn't just happening here?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." I checked. 3 other neighborhoods have similar charges, same company name, same P.O. box, nearly identical invoices. We stood there in silence, letting it sink in. This wasn't just a petty theft ring. This was an organized scam targeting multiple communities, hiding behind fake companies and HOA technicalities. The next morning, I called Marissa Kepler again. "We need to talk," I said. "You're going to want to see what we've found." She scheduled a meeting at her office for that same afternoon. When we arrived, she had 2 assistants and a representative from the State Bureau of Investigation present. We laid out everything: Horizon Access Solutions, the fake security system, the shared P.O. box, and the pattern across multiple HOAs. The SBI agent, a tall man with a hard-set jaw named Whitaker, leaned forward and asked, "Do you have contact information for this Lana Pierce?" "She's supposedly in Arizona," Sheila said. "But we have her last known address and phone number. The number's been disconnected." Whitaker nodded. "We've seen this before. They set up dummy LLCs, funnel HOA money through them, and vanish before anyone gets wise. But most don't leave such clean documentation behind." Marissa turned to me. "You said this invoice was from 2 years ago. Why hasn't it shown up in any earlier audits?" "Because we never had audits," I said. "Karen kept everything internal and off the books. We only discovered it when we started combing through transaction logs line by line." "We'll issue a warrant for Lana's financial records," Whitaker said. "If the money moved through her accounts, we'll find it." That night, I sat on the porch, flag rustling above me, and thought about how deep this thing had gone. It wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was organized theft, and while Karen had been the face of it here, she wasn't working alone. 3 weeks later, things exploded. The State Bureau of Investigation executed simultaneous warrants at 4 addresses, 1 in Arizona, 3 in state. 2 arrests were made that morning, including Lana Pierce, who had been living under a different name using falsified IDs. The SBI found over $95,000 in fraudulent HOA payments spread across several bank accounts. The news broke within the week. Local channels ran the story under the headline, HOA Fraud Ring Busted. Dozens of homeowners defrauded. Rosewood Pines was mentioned by name. Karen's face was shown walking out of the county courthouse in handcuffs for her arraignment. She was being charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and aggravated theft. At the next community meeting, every seat was filled. Some folks stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes wide. No one talked. They just listened as Marissa Kepler, invited by the Oversight Committee, stood at the front and explained the scope of what had happened. "This wasn't just neighbors cutting corners," she said. "This was a calculated, multi-layered fraud operation. And thanks to this community, especially the Oversight Committee, we now have enough evidence to pursue prosecution at the state level." Sheila addressed the group next, explaining that restitution proceedings were already underway. The court had frozen all accounts tied to the fraudulent companies. With the money recovered, every affected homeowner would receive a refund proportional to their dues from the past 2 years. Then it was my turn. I looked around the room not as a whistleblower, not as someone seeking applause, but as a neighbor who'd had enough. "We trusted the wrong people," I said, "but we also stood up when it counted. This isn't just about what happened, it's about what we're building now: transparency, accountability, and a community that doesn't turn a blind eye." There was no applause, just nods. That meant more. 3 months later, during the annual HOA meeting, the first real one in years, we ratified a new charter. No more unchecked spending. No more secret votes. All contracts required competitive bids and full documentation. A third-party firm would handle annual audits, and residents could request to view spending reports at any time. The clubhouse got real security cameras, this time installed by a licensed contractor whose work was verified before a cent was paid. The vendor was chosen by community vote. And as for me, I stepped down from the Oversight Committee. I'd done what I came to do. I wanted to go back to fishing with Wyatt and fixing up the old shed-out back I'd been neglecting. But before I left, I made sure to install a small bronze plaque at the base of the flagpole in front of the clubhouse. It read, "This flag stands not just for freedom, but for the courage to defend it at home and in our neighborhoods. Justice didn't come easy, but it came. And this time it stayed."